Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 900. My opponent started off with e4, and I went with d5, the Scandinavian defense. So he continued taking, that's normal, and I play knight f6. You see that's the second choice there. And he plays this slightly unusual move, bishop b5 check, but this is actually a pretty good line that has been recommended by Chess Explained, among others. He just doesn't quite play it right. So he gives the check, and blocking with the bishop is pretty much the only move. And then rather than exchanging here, the normal course is to retreat the bishop. So one idea, top choice here, bishop c4, allows black to play bishop g4, poking the queen. So this is one of the funny things. If you're playing this as black, you have to remember about this line. As soon as that bishop moves away, well, not as soon, but this bishop isn't particularly well placed here on d7. So white has moved his bishop twice. It's okay for you to move your bishop twice and get it to a better square. And then, it might get kicked around a little bit, but should be okay. If white plays on with g4, that's taking some chances, but it's trying to hold on to the pawn. I guess kick the knight and try and hold on to the pawn. As it is, that pawn is going to get recaptured pretty soon. And then the other way of playing, to avoid bishop g5 and that funny pawn structure, or bishop g4 and f3, is this bishop could retreat immediately to e2, preventing bishop to g4, but then the bishop can just come out to f5. But you normally take here first, say d4, and then bishop to f5. And this is also a fine position for black. It's just keep in mind that the bishop sitting on d7 is not a particularly good square, so look for an opportune moment to reposition it and get that bishop outside the pawn chain, and then you can push the e-pawn forward, and you are fine here. Anyway, my job was made easier when my opponent just took, and so I have a decent position coming out of the opening. And after knight c3, we're just out of the opening book, but he hasn't held on to that pawn, so you just grab it back, and this is fine, probably about equal. He could just continue developing with knight f3. That's fine, but he traded. This maybe helps me a little bit because my queen is not getting chased away from this square immediately anyway. It's his knight is quite a few moves away from hitting the queen, and he doesn't have a light squared bishop, so he could chase it with pawns, I suppose. So it's a good central location for the queen. It's not going to be a target like it is in other openings where the queen comes out too early. So he plays knight f3 and play e5. The chess engine points out a funny line here, which thinks is good for black. So queen e4 check. Normally I don't play this way because I expect that after blocking with the queen, we'll just end up with a queen trade, and it'll be a long endgame. Even if I'm slightly better, it'll be a tough grind. But actually, this isn't about trading queens. It's about grabbing a pawn. The c-pawn is hanging. So if we back up, instead of blocking with the queen and losing a pawn, he could play king f1, in which case you just continue with e5, and he's going to have trouble developing his rook. So just a simple tactic there, but actually leads to a pretty good position for black. Anyway, I missed that idea. I played e5, he went d3. Maybe d4 was a little bit stronger, although after d4 you have to worry about, back up, after d4 you have to worry about e4, kicking the knight, and oh, yeah, I guess the knight is not happy there. Knight to e5 was recommended. I guess if you kick it, it can, where the heck can it go if you kick it again? It can go to g4 and then back to e3, I guess. Anyway, that's how the computer would play there. But he just went d3. Simple chess. I go bishop e7. So we get some fairly normal moves. He went queen e2, knight c6, defending the pawn. He castled. And here I just castled too, although the chess engine much prefers castling queenside, which now that I see it, it makes sense. The queen and the rook are automatically lined up. I have maybe ideas of pushing the e-pawn forward again, and I can launch some kind of pawn storm against his king while he still has one piece yet to develop. So makes sense. I just castled, and we're staying in the range of about even. Bishop g5, maybe not the best way to play this. It likes taking, actually. Taking, the chess engine likes taking. Taking, knight takes g5, and knight to d4. I get a good position for my knight with tempo on the queen. The queen comes over here to h5. It's no problem. I can just kick the knight away. And once again, there's a pawn hanging over here. So this is also good for black. Anyway, this is good for black too. I just kick the bishop, and he just has to go back. And this is not a real weakness on the light squares here because he doesn't have a light squared bishop, although he does have a knight that maybe could exploit it. And I kind of help him out here with this next move, h6. I was missing a tactical idea here. I was wanting to play f5, which turns out to be the good move here in this position. And I just was annoyed by the idea his knight might pop into g5 here, supported by the bishop. But of course I can just play f4, shutting down the bishop, hitting it, and also his knight is hanging, so two pieces are hanging. So in fact, knight g5 is just not playable there. So I could have just played f5 immediately. So when I played h6, that was a needless move, a pointless move. I was preparing f5 when f5 really didn't need any preparing. I could have just played it right away. Anyway, he spots all these holes on the light squares and brings his knight into h4. That makes sense. I play f5 now, drops the knight into g6, and I decide I don't mind so much if he takes off this dark squared bishop. So he does. Well, it's better than losing the rook too. So, but I guess I had no way of saving it. But I thought this is still fine. This is in the range of about equal. Maybe c4 is a little bit questionable because it does leave a weakness for me to play against. He could play instead rook f to e1. Should be fine. Anyway, he went c4. I went queen d6. And he went to f4. That's not a bad idea. Try and undermine the center. And then the chess engine does not like my e4 move here. I was trying to open things up a little bit, but the chess engine would just play knight to g6. Just defend. And that seems fine as well. So anyway, I played e4. And he took. And now, after e4, the chess engine starts to like white. Maybe because this pawn is isolated, this f pawn. But he does have a couple of weak pawns. White has a couple of weak pawns too he needs to take care of. Let's see, I went rook a to, oh no, he went rook a to d1, kicking my queen. I played queen c6. So now I'm looking at this pawn, and there's still pressure over here. Well, I'm going to slowly build it up. And then he went rook d2 here. So here he could have improved with bishop to d4, and it says my best is just to drop back. And so this is starting to look like a good position for white. I think this is how white can get some kind of advantage. I mean, not necessarily winning, but maybe a slight edge here. So a little bit of inaccurate play from me is let white into the game, but he doesn't really take advantage of it. He plays rook d2. I went knight f5 now. Now I'm starting to develop some threats against his weak pawns here. He just doubles on the d file, ignoring what I'm doing here. I bring my rook to the f file. I'm ignoring what he's doing. We're both ignoring each other. And now he has a choice of which pawn to defend. I'm going to take the bishop on e3, which will dislocate his queen, and then either the f pawn or the c pawn will be hanging. And it's preferable by far to save the f pawn. It gives his king a stronger position. Even though it does look a little bit, you might say, drafty here, opening up that diagonal, but it's even worse to lose the f pawn, as we saw in the game. After g3, I could grab a pawn here, say he takes, I take, then I grab on c4. But here it's actually safe to take on a7. There's a big difference with the game. He played queen takes a7 in the game, trying to maintain material parity, and that just failed immediately. So, but here it's safe. I don't have that threat on the f file that I did in the game because he's got a solid pawn here. I mean, I can develop a threat, but I should first save my other queenside pawn. He drops back, and then I can try and go after his pawns. But I'll be taking some risks. If I push my pawns forward, it'll open up my king to his attack as well. So an even game at this point. Anyway, he defended the c pawn. He went b3, and so now I do the same thing, but I grab the other pawn. So I take off the bishop, then I take on f4. And now he needs to play something other than queen takes a7. The chess engine is recommending h3, maybe just giving a little lift to the king, and then I would play a5, and we would play on, and I'm a pawn up here. but he can maybe hold this position. So not game over by any means. But after queen takes a7, it actually is game over. And queen f6 is the strongest move here, so not too hard to spot. But his queen has left defense of the king, and it's not so easy for it to get back into a relevant position. I mean, it can come back to e3 here, but I've got you know, an overload on f1. I just have too much force, and his queen doesn't have a way to get back to defend that square. So he played h3, give the king some lift, but some luft, but this is not working. So rook f1 check. He took. I mean, the other try here is king h2, and this doesn't work. Well, even queen f4 check is pretty deadly, but best is queen e5 check. And the idea is that well, g3 is forced, but if the queen is on e5 instead of on f4, then I don't have to move the queen in this position. I have other moves here, and in fact, bringing the other rook in is going to lead to a mate pretty shortly. So there's a forced mate in every line here. He just took. I took. He goes here, and then I came back with the check, and no matter what he does, he's losing the knight or the rook on d2. I mean, even if he plays g3, I have queen takes d2. So he moved the king back. I grabbed the pawn. He grabbed a pawn. I mean, I grabbed the rook, and he grabbed a pawn. And then I come in with the check. He went king h2, and then I come in with the other check, and now it's a mate in one. So he resigned at this point. Anyway, a quick game, but kind of fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Bye.